Hi, thank you so much, Miller, and thank you for inviting me to talk. I am basically a hemp designer, and I have been really amazed by the amount of work that has been going into the fashion industry, but it's something that still needs a huge amount of work, and we're not there yet. So I thought it'd be really interesting to discuss this idea around natural fibers and what impact it can have on us actually achieving some goals of sustainable fashion. So the fashion industry is actually the second biggest pollutant after the oil industry, and this basically shows the damage that it has done for many years, especially recently as a fast fashion process. And some of the things that we need to consider is this idea of overconsumption and how we overconsume clothes and we don't generally need half of them. In fact, you only probably wear about 30% of the wardrobe that you own. We also need to look at the bigger factors such as water and the amount of water that goes into this production, the chemicals that are toxicating our waters, the pollution, all the air that is being polluted by carbon dioxide, and the land mass of which is fighting towards food supply as well as our population is growing. And this is something that is really important when we look at fashion. So as we go through, I'd love you to think about these things and the impact it will have on our ecosystem. Just a bit about me. I'm a designer of Cultivar clothing, and I set up my company to basically make sure that we are producing garments and textiles which are biodegradable. And this has come from an environmentalist background within myself as an activist and a designer. So I will show you the benefits of hemp as we talk through my PowerPoint. So to start off with, I think it's really important that we do look at the amount of natural fibers that are made compared to synthetics. And synthetics are generally produced by petrochemicals which do not biodegrade, and therefore this is a great problem. In 2019 alone, we saw 62.9% of synthetics produced compared to 31%. And there you can see that there's still a huge amount of work that needs to happen for natural fibers. And as we move forward, we need to consider the fact that maybe plastic factories are not actually closing down. And through my own research, I have seen there's a huge amount of plastic factories still opening and producing these synthetics. We also need to consider local production and whether we can see us cutting carbon emissions down by growing and producing textiles within our own countries, and also how much how can we keep growing natural fibers, and is this going to increase over the next coming years? Looking at the comparisons between natural fibers and synthetics, I think it's really important to understand the differences and what each one does provide as a sustainable alternative. So looking at land space alone, we see that natural fibers do require a lot of land space compared to synthetics, which is generally produces a high yield of material within a small chemical lab or a warehouse. But when you look at the amount of water that is used, natural fibers do use a lot of water through its growing and its washing processes, but synthetics also does through its refineries, petroleum and polyester fiber production. So there you're still not really winning on the water content. But when it comes to energy and carbon dioxide, this is where it gets quite interesting, because we see synthetics use a huge amount of energy compared to natural fibers. It's almost 10 times as much. And when it comes to carbon dioxide, we see natural fibers actually absorb carbon almost 4 times more than synthetics through its photosynthesis and carbon cycle processes. So that is a great benefit, and that is something that we need to look at as getting towards this net zero levels of carbon reduction. We also need to consider chemicals that are put into the materials. So synthetics add chemicals like shrinkage-free and wrinkle-free properties, which allows that product to be easily looked after. where a natural fibre would require a lot of energy for washing and even ironing it. So it all comes down to the properties of the materials as well. But the most important thing, I believe, is this level of biodegradability. And unfortunately, over time, textiles has become so massive that we're putting them all into our landfill, and synthetics is shown that they will not biodegrade until it gets to at least 200 years, which is putting a huge amount of pressure onto our landfill, and in turn is affecting our ecosystems. So natural fibres, those sorts of products will biodegrade and within potentially 5 years, which is a great thing. And by using natural dyes and reducing the chemicals, these products will safely decompose into our soils. But what I want you to think about is, what is the true cost of this? I wanted to point out some of the devastating impacts that we've experienced just from the fashion industry, and hugely plastics. So here is a really interesting example of plastics found in our water systems, and this is a German river where you can see all these little pits of plastic which have been caught up. And these microfibers become very dangerous because they go into everything. They go into our fish, our animals, and then we even eat that ourselves. Only 10% of all plastic produced in the last 70 years was recycled, and this is a very small percentage. So we need to keep recycling and make sure that these plastics are not entering our water systems. Another devastating impact is actually the way that water systems are depleting. Many of you might have heard of the Aral Sea crisis, where in Uzbekistan we actually saw the disappearance of a sea because of a cotton industry had intensely irrigated their cotton crops and had actually taken the water away. And this was devastating when you had a population growth who also needed water for drinking and their other means. So this is just one impact of water and how it has destroyed its own ecosystem. But finally, another problem is the toxic fuels, the wounds after process of textile producing, which includes dyeing or processing fabrics. And so what happens is these terrible toxins enter the community's drinking facilities and has a very bad impact on their health, and is again destroying ecosystems. So this is something that we will look into a circular system and how we can avoid this. But one thing that is for sure is moving away from synthetics, even looking at natural fibres. As much as I love these crops, each one will have its benefits. And the reason why I'm so passionate about hemp is it doesn't only have over 200,000 uses as a plant in terms of bioplastics and medicine and textiles and paper, but it also has these incredible benefits for the environment where we are reducing our water, where we can reduce our land mass. And these are just some examples of that. So hemp is a bioremediation crop, which basically means that all the powerful nutrients are actually put back into the soils through its strong roots instead of pulling it out like cotton would. So looking at it versus a cotton material, we can see that hemp doesn't even use fertilizers, it doesn't require it, and therefore we are protecting the land and the soil's nutrients. We also see water use is cut, as hemp only uses 1/3 of the water than cotton does. Also, land is reduced by half, so hemp has a very fast yielding crop and it will use only half of the land that cotton would. But finally, we see it is one of the best carbon captures as a plant, as it can absorb 4 times as much carbon as a cotton plant. And therefore, each time we buy a hemp product, we're also buying a carbon capture, which is absorbing awful things out of the atmosphere, but being a great thing as a final product. And moving back to kind of this idea of circularity, is the way that we can move forward as a fashion industry is ensuring that all our products, when we're finished with them, go into a circular loop system. And this involves basically ensuring that we take back our things when we finish with them and they go into a sorting process, and the materials will be recycled, and they will go over and over and over again. It's important to remember that eventually they will become useless, as every time it's recycled, it will be downgraded as a material. But it's important because it will reduce the amount of raw materials that we need to start with. And just another example, you can also place water and chemicals through this system to be recycled instead of being released into water streams or fresh water being used again. So that's a great benefit for the industry, and I think that's something that we're going to see more and more of over time as companies have more pressure on them to do it, but it's something that we must see happen for us to protect our resources. So finally, I wanted to highlight some of the solutions, and I would say that this is a very complicated problem when it comes to synthetics, and there is many solutions, and this again it's all about how we individually do these actions together. But I want you to remember these ideas of the 6 R's, which is to rethink and to refuse. The things that we buy sometimes are not even necessary, or the things that we have we need to appreciate more of and actually use more of. We need to learn to repair things, and something that we're working on is doing online workshops with people to teach them how to stitch and to repair their own garments, to make sure that everything we do own lasts a lot longer. And this is important because when it comes to reuse, which is the next one, it's about getting as much out of that garment or product as you can, and therefore you can actually start sharing your products and renting your products, and they actually provide their own economy within themselves sometimes. An important one is to reduce, especially when it comes to plastic. We see unfortunately COVID has brought a huge problem of now disposable plastics, and sometimes it's better to reuse something over and over again, like a fabricated face mask, instead of buying a plastic one and throwing it away every day. Finally, we have recycling, which is something that I would imagine most people know and do, but the issue is for me is that so many different types of plastics and materials and blends that it becomes very complicated. And so really, to be successful at recycling, we need to have very streamlined ways where everyone can understand it, and it's a very universal way of working with materials. So what I would urge you to do is always to buy products which will biodegrade and compost, because over time, if we can move the demand away from plastics and things that do biodegrade, we will encourage more businesses to produce things like that. And over time, I feel like this will be a very powerful move in the way that we buy and use our things. So just to round off, going back to my question, I think that natural fibres do have a huge role to play in sustainable fashion when it comes to biodegradable products, which we will see safely biodegrade and break down into our soils. But it also comes down to the way that we use our materials and the way that we shop, the way that we take care of our garments, and the way that we dispose of them after use. So I really hope that you all took something away from that when it comes to your clothes and how fashionable we all are, and it can be very fashionable to be sustainable also. So thank you very much, and if you have any questions, please get in contact with me. My email address is there. You've got to remember that this is your future is now, and you can make a difference. Thank you for listening.